Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's MusicWise. Before we begin, I just want to thank all of you for watching this show every week. It's been a learning curve for all of us, but a fun one, and every guest has been so engaging. And I encourage those of you who are watching to feel free to make comments, to ask us questions as we're talking. I try my best to sort of in the corner of my eye see what's coming on the screen, and I do my best also ask the questions and answer the questions. This week we have with us someone who, ever since coming to Las Vegas, has really been a gift to our community, and has been inspiring to all of us, has been a leading light in not only at the university, but for the entire arts and culture community. And I'm so happy that she has found the time to join us here at MusicWise. So please help me in welcoming Dean Nancy Uscher. Hi.
Donato, I'm so pleased to be with you today.
I am as well. It's I remember the first time we met. It was the first meeting we had was in your office. It was with Jerry Crawford, and the three of us. It was as if we just started dreaming and thinking about collaborations from the moment we saw each other. And what I so appreciate from you was that even though, I was also fairly new to the community, the arts community of Las Vegas, as you were as well. But it just seemed like we were family from the very beginning.
I felt the same way, and I think it's only deepened. It has been joyful to think about how we can contribute to our community and the world. And it is just a great pleasure, Donato, to work with you and your colleagues.
You know, in the course of the many conversations we've had since then, there have been, and it's always a little funny because there are often other people involved with our, but we often sort of gravitate to, oh my gosh, you were playing in that concert, or you knew this conductor, or you also love this recording. And we always have these sort of asides that probably last a little longer than they deserve to in the context of these meetings that we have. So I'm super happy now. We have no other. We can just really focus on these things that I know we both love so much, but also to talk about our shared vision for Las Vegas. But we'll get to that. But first of all, Nancy, just talk a little bit about who you are, where you're from. You have such a varied history in not only academia and stewardship of various universities, but you are also a very accomplished musician and have had so many wonderful experiences. So just talk a little bit about your background.
Well, when I was about 4 years old, I was living in the suburbs of New York, White Plains, New York. My parents, who loved music dearly, played piano, but mainly just loved listening to music, loved orchestral music, grew to love chamber music, but early on just loved orchestral music, would bring my sister and me to the Tanglewood Music Festival, where the Boston Symphony was playing, and this is the 1950s. So from the time I was very little, I may not have been happy in the car on the way. It was a long car ride, and you know how little kids are. But by the time I got there, I was intrigued. I found myself wandering backstage, seeing people like Pierre Monteux, Charles Munch. I never knew at the time that I remember a scene where Mrs. Monteux was in a car with a little poodle and the door was open. I was just walking by these people. Now we think of them as, legendary artists who really inhabited a fascinating time in history. So I think from very early on, I grew to love music. When I was about 9, I started playing violin. I started playing piano when I was 8, and, was quite serious from a young age. And then eventually found that I loved to play viola and chamber music. Played both for a while, then eventually went off to conservatory to learn viola and to really focus a lot on chamber music, but I also loved orchestras. And I think that I always felt as a musician that, whatever I could learn about life, I was interested in the humanities, very interested in the creation of knowledge, to keep studying, to keep learning about music, but how I could enhance my life as a musician by learning about many disciplines. And so, it brought me to eventually to want to do some advanced study. I was at NYU, got a PhD, also did some work at Juilliard at the time. And there was a
PhD in what, Nancy?
It was in music. It was in music, but it was a kind of crossover between performance and musicology. Or there was a lot of philosophy within that curriculum. Well, I think that we'll get to this in some of our work together today on MusicWise. But at a certain time in my 20s, I felt that I needed to leave the United States and sort of see what could happen if I joined an orchestra in another country. And then, I was in Israel for almost 6 years, came back to this country in the 80s, kept freelancing. I played in the Houston Opera, the Grand Opera Orchestra, did a lot of work in New York in all kinds of groups, the Brooklyn Philharmonic. I played in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra as a sub, and lots of dance work with Martha Graham. Anyway, it was, I had a great time. But eventually I thought, I think I would love to join a campus. So in 1992, I became a professor at the University of New Mexico, and then moved into a number of administrative positions. I was chair, I was associate provost of the university, and then I seemed to continue to somehow blend being a musician with, wanting to serve universities and academies in different leadership positions. I was a provost and acting president at California Institute of the Arts in Valencia, and then I was president of Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle. And then after my 5-year term was completed, I saw this opportunity that was available in Las Vegas. I didn't really know anyone, but that has also characterized a lot of what I've chosen to do. I often go somewhere where I actually don't know anyone. I know the reputation of a wonderful institution, but I find it very exciting to join a community that I didn't know, and learn it and figure out how I can contribute, how I can make wonderful new colleagues like you. And I think of life as an adventure, frankly. I mean, that really has guided me.
Do you think, I haven't made this connection before, but I think there's something to it. Do you think that your desire to step into something that's seemingly unknown in terms of personal connections, do you think that has a lot to do with those initial impressions you had of Tanglewood? Because I think that, first of all, we need to tell our audience for those of you who aren't obsessed with music like we are, Tanglewood is the summer home of the Boston Symphony, which started in the 1940s with Serge Koussevitzky. He was the music director at the time, and it was originally literally a shed where underneath this shed, the Boston Symphony would put on concerts, and there was a little bit of space where a certain audience could also sit underneath this shed. But the majority of folks, before the new Tanglewood Music Center was built, Seiji Ozawa Hall, everyone sat on this beautiful lawn, and it was really sort of a picnic with live music. And this, it's really such a wonderful thing to even think about, because I never saw that original incarnation of Tanglewood, but this idea where you could just walk up to your cultural heroes, whether it be Madame Koussevitzky or Madame next, or a young Leonard Bernstein or a Pierre Monteux, who during the year were these sort of very revered figures on the famous concerts, but they were having barbecues and music, and just like everyone else. So this sort of openness that you experienced very young with music, do you think that had a little bit to do with how it informed your?
That's really a fascinating perspective to share. I think maybe I did get used to just getting used to the adventurous part of life where you try something you don't know about and you're maybe not fearful because you don't know to be fearful about it, and very, very, very likely. Although I think I was quite influenced at the time by my parents, who in their courtship after World War II and even during World War II, found that the one thing they had in common was Tanglewood. And even in 1941, before my father went off to the war, he was in the European part of the war, and Middle East. When they met in Connecticut, where they both lived, they discovered in 1941, about 6 months before Pearl Harbor happened, they discovered that they had both been at Tanglewood to hear music, and that kind of was a revelation to them. They didn't know that many other people, I guess, who did that. And so I think that as a child, even though it was an adventure, I had the comfort of knowing my parents were very happy revisiting their romantic sense of what it was like to listen to classical music. They always loved classical music. And so yes, I think that you can take on adventures when you feel secure. And I guess I was very fortunate to feel if I got lost there, someone would come find me, as I was wandering around at 4 years old. But bringing it into an analogous situation as you did, I think it's very likely that I was fortunate to know that it was okay to take risks, and things would be okay, even if something didn't work out.
That's wonderful, and it's to have that confidence and that feeling of it's okay to just let go and see what happens next. So how old were you when you switched from violin to viola?
I was probably the stage where I was going to music camps, like 13, 14 years old. I probably still played violin a bit at the camps, but it was during those summers. First, I went to a place called Empire State Music Camp in upstate New York, in Hurleyville, New York. Then I went to Marywood Music School, which was also right next door to Tanglewood. It was in Lenox. And by then I was sort of, a confirmed chamber music lover. That camp was almost all chamber music. So I probably was playing chamber music on both instruments, but eventually when it came to being serious about the role that I loved as an inner voice, and then, doing recitals and repertoire, it was viola that really captured my imagination.
I want to take us to your decision to leave the United States. You mentioned Israel and also England. What happened first? Where did you go first?
What happened first is that I was a student at Eastman School of Music, and there was a fellowship that was available for a junior in college to go to the Royal College of Music and study. And there was a connection between Eastman and the Royal College because of an odd reason. Keith Faulkner was a singing professor who had been at college he was quite prominent in England. He went to be a professor at Cornell University, probably in the 60s. And he found out that there was a fellowship at Covent Garden, the opera, that was not being used. It was just money sitting there because there was a guy named Jimmy Smith. This is maybe more than our audience needs to know, but this is often how things happen. He happened to sit on two boards. He sat on the board of Covent Garden, and he sat on the board of the Royal College of Music. His great friend was Brooke Astor, the wonderful philanthropist.
Yes.
So Brooke Astor, because she had known someone called Francis Toy, who was a musicologist that she very much admired, had worked with Mr. Smith to create a fellowship at Covent Garden. But then she found out that no one was using it. So Jimmy Smith went back to the Royal College and said to Keith Faulkner, "Hey, we have money here, and we're not helping the young opera singers. It's just staying there in a pot of money."
Yeah.
So Mrs. Astor said, "Well, why don't you use it for the Royal College of Music then?" She was very flexible. I ended up meeting her that year. That was wonderful.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But so Sir Keith said, "Well, let's see. I was at Cornell, and they have a very wonderful arts program, but it's mainly scholarly and musicology and so forth, or, different kinds of art history. I'd like to give the money to a conservatory, a more performance-based school. Let me think. Oh, yes. Eastman School of Music in Rochester is probably the closest one to Ithaca, New York. So, it was, quite random. And so Sir Keith said, he became Sir. Sir Keith said, "I think I'm just going to give it to Eastman." Well, this is really gets involved. I didn't know about the fellowship, but I happened to write to the Royal College of Music because my mother was a social worker whose brother was a violinist who'd gone to the Royal College of Music. And I was kind of feeling, after 2 years of Eastman, I think I could take a little time away from this cold and snow in Rochester. And so I in just, no typewriter, no computer. I just wrote longhand a letter to the Royal College of Music and said, I found out, by looking in the library those days, who the director was. And I said, "Dear Director Faulkner, I would like to be considered. I go to Eastman School of Music, and I'd like to be considered as a student for a year at the college. I found out Cecil Aronovitz teaches there, and I'd like to go for these days we might call it a gap year, but in those days, I don't know what we called it. I just wanted a little time off." So one day, Walter Handel, who was directing Eastman, came up to me and he said, "I hear you're going to the Royal College of Music next year." I said, "How do you know that I wrote a letter? I didn't tell you that." I was very polite. He said, "Well, Sir Keith Faulkner, we've just decided to have this fellowship." And he said, "Well, since you've written the letter, maybe you should get it." I mean, Donato, this is not what usually happens in life. I just want to tell all of our listeners, this was a 1 in a million. I mean, it's a real fluke. However,
okay, I have to disagree with you, Nancy. It's wonderful that this happened, but why it happened to you was because you were taking initiative. You wrote that letter.
I did.
And I can't tell you how many people, everyone else did not write the letter. You wrote the letter. So you got the fellowship.
But it was, how many people write a letter and then find out there's a completely financed year ahead of you and you'll meet Brooke Astor, who gave you the money. That was unusual. So, but then of course they said, "Well, as much as we like you, Nancy, it is a very, very valuable fellowship, and we feel there should really be a competition for it." And I said, "Absolutely." I even felt guilty, that I should be the one to get it. So they went through a process, but I did get it. And it was a wonderful year in which I met Lionel Curtis, who was really considered the first modern violist. Had a great, it was 3 terms at the college. I got what they call the ARCM, the Associate of the Royal College of Music. I, learned a lot about contemporary British composers that I didn't know. Ollie Nussin was a colleague of mine at the time, Simon Bainbridge, people that later on went on to do really interesting things. So, I felt very lucky. I did have tea with Mrs. Astor, and she said, "I want to meet the person who has, this fellowship." And it was lovely. And she later sent me a book that she wrote, and we kept a correspondence going for a little while. Anyway, Donato, life has been very fortunate, and I do agree with you. And one of the most fortunate things that ever happened to me was moving to Las Vegas, meeting you, and getting to know the wonderful university, the wonderful, wonderful Las Vegas Philharmonic, meeting so many fabulous community friends of both of us. And I just, I feel life has been, very fortunate. I feel lucky. And what I also want to say is, I think each adventure should be taken on its own. I don't think we should I try never to compare situations. Right now I'm in Las Vegas and I love it. And I love being with you on MusicWise, and I feel very privileged to be with you. And I feel that each step, each journey we take in life should just be valued for what it is. And I do feel that right now, being in Las Vegas, it's been a strange time to be living during the pandemic, but I couldn't imagine being anywhere else but Las Vegas while I'm living through this. So
I feel the same way. I couldn't agree more. And even now, as we've all spent so many weeks alone and unto ourselves, yet connecting, this in and of itself is a unique experience that we can all take and cherish and learn from. One of the things that you shared with us, and I think maybe we should use this clip, because you met Arthur Rubinstein during this time, correct?
I did.
You shared with us he recorded the Brahms second piano concerto quite a few times, and there are many versions that are available, but you chose one that is one of his earlier studio recordings with Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Can you retell for me, but tell our audience how you came to meet Arthur Rubinstein during this time in England?
Yes. Well, in England, I had two kind of a little more distant experiences. And then I was in Israel, it all, 8 or 9 years later, it all kind of came together. In England, I was visiting Lionel Curtis. He lived in Wimbledon, near the Wimbledon tennis facility.
Mhm.
And there was a brownout in like December of 1970. Because there was a strike of some of the workforces. And so everyone took turns not having electricity around the city, and it was getting cold. So it was, not a wonderful experience for people living in England at the time. Now I realize, it was 25 years after the war. I never thought of those things at the time, but, London was a wonderful place, great theater, and obviously wonderful orchestras, and many of them. But I think to myself, there were still some social issues that issues that people were going through. So when I would go to see Lionel Curtis, one of the times the Rubinsteins had just left, so I just missed meeting him at that time. But Mr. Curtis, when he came to the door, in a very high pitched voice, said, "Oh yes, Arthur and his wife also." When they rang the doorbell, we didn't know they were here because the doorbell was not working and because our electricity was not functioning. So it was just, I felt in a way, he called Arthur Rubinstein a spring chicken. You see, at the time, I was 20 and Lionel Curtis was 90, and Rubinstein must have been, 5 to 15 years younger or something like that.
Mhm.
And so I felt like I kind of got to know him through Lionel Curtis. I heard a funny broadcast with him called Desert Island Discs, where the host on the BBC show said, what if you had to be on a desert island, kind of like the way we're living, by the way, what records would you bring with you? I don't want to go to a desert island. Yes, but Mr. Rubinstein, that is the premise of this show. What would you? No, I don't want to go. And I don't want to take any records with me. Okay, but if you had to, what would you take? He said, okay, I'd only take one record. I love the Schubert Two-Cello Quintet, and I would only take it if there were particular artists playing. Well, who would it be? Well, there must have been an old recording. I don't know, but with one of the quartets, and I think Lionel Curtis himself was playing. So Rubinstein would want to hear his own friends, and he loved the piece. And then they say, well, besides, let's say you could take the Bible and Shakespeare. What other item would you take? This is a little gruesome. I just want to forewarn our audience. He said, I would take a gun and shoot myself as soon as I got there.
He was always honest, that's for sure.
Very feisty. And then when I got to Israel, he was doing master classes, and I had just arrived to be a co-principal violist of the orchestra. And I was telling you before we went on the air how friendly everyone was. And there was a kind of family-ish feeling among the cultural community in Jerusalem, which was at the time very much a world city. It's very important, continues to be very important. People from all over the world at the time really lived there and came back and forth, let's say, from other destinations. And so somehow I met him. And I told him I was in the orchestra, and I happened to mention that we were going to be recording Hatikva, the national anthem of Israel, on a particular Monday. It was a Monday in like early November 1978. And because at that point, there was no CNN, no around the clock news. Every station signed off like at midnight or 11 p.m. And our radio orchestra, the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra, was called Israel Broadcasting Authority. And we were you heard the Hatikva that we recorded when radio or television signed off, but they had only old versions. So Gary Bertini, our new music director, said, let's make a fresh version. So Mr. Rubinstein said, do you think I could just sit in the hall? It was the Jerusalem Theater, beautiful small hall. And could I just sit there and listen while you record it? I said, Mr. Rubinstein, I'm sure that people would be thrilled if you wanted to come. No one would, mind at all. So I remember I arranged for him to come. He sat down in a chair. I can see it like it was yesterday. He just sat by himself near sort of an aisle. And he just sat there looking up and thinking while we must have done 10 takes of it. And he just loved it. And he said, thank you very much. I love listening to this beautiful piece. And I said, well, we have our opening of our season tonight. And when you open a season in Israel, you stand and you play the national anthem at the beginning of the season. So we were going to be playing that piece that night before we did our performance of Berlioz' Romeo and Juliet, the entire piece. And he said, yes, I will come. So when we arrived on stage that night, the music director had left a beautiful rose on every seat with a little laminated card, which I still have. I don't have the rose because I'll tell you why I don't have it. But the card said, to each and every member of the orchestra, as we start our journey together, our musical journey, I wish all of you good luck, good health. I hope everything works out for all of us. And so I still have that card that Gary wrote. But on the seat was a rose. And when at the end of the concert, Mr. Rubinstein came up to the stage, I was, probably getting up, and he was waving to me. And he was just kind of there at the edge of the stage. And so I took my rose and I went over to him and I bent down and I said, Mr. Rubinstein, thank you so much for coming tonight. It meant so much to all of us. And I handed him the rose and he kissed my hand. And I'll always, these memories are indelible, but Donato, being with you and being with our audience today so that I can, I can talk about it and re-recall it is a very precious opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to tell the story.
Well, let's add to those memories by sharing this very special recording. And I thank you for picking this. This is Anton Rubinstein with Charles Munch conducting the Boston Symphony. And we'll hear a little bit at the beginning of the second piano concerto of Johannes Brahms. Thank you, Ellen. It's one of those pieces that you want to hear the whole thing every time you hear that glorious introduction by the horn. And what's so wonderful, you hear this throughout Rubinstein's life as a recording artist and performing artist, is this lyricism, this sense of occasion, this singing line that whether he was 35 or 85 was a primary characteristic of his playing.
When I listen to that music, and this is what music does for all of humanity, the memories come back. It takes us to different places. Every human being experiences it differently. But one place it takes me back to is as a child, in the evening, let's say I was in bed and my parents had some friends over. On their little hi-fi, they would often play this piece. And they loved this piece. They loved Brahms' Fourth Symphony. They loved the Schumann Piano Concerto. There were about 3 or 4 pieces that they played very often. So when I hear this piece, not only do I hear that sound of the Boston Symphony all those years ago and hear this remarkable, remarkable artist, Mr. Rubinstein, but I also remember the warmth of hearing that music and knowing that it gave my parents great pleasure as well. And that, again, is what music does for us. There's nothing like it.
I just want to share, I was looking this up because I'll share this with you as well, Nancy. At about the same time, well, a little earlier, in 1969, there was this incredible documentary made about Anton Rubinstein that won the Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1970. It was actually quite well known, but it's never been re-released. But it is available on YouTube. It's called "The Love of Life," and it's a perfect title for him because he really loved life. From the moment he was born until he passed away. "L'amour de la vie" is the original title.
Thank you for.
I'll send it to you, and I'll also post it as well.
Thank you
so
much.
You're now living in Jerusalem. You're playing with the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra in the early 70s. This must have been
78 to 84. So
excuse me, later on.
I was in England, and then I came back to get my degrees, and then freelance in New York and play with various orchestras too. But yes, and so then I decided I really needed to kind of just see what life had to offer and see how I could go to a place where I also knew no one really, and see what could happen there.
And so you arrive in the late 70s, and living in Jerusalem at this time, as you said, it was such an open sense of a large family, which is a great a great feeling to have in a new environment. What were these, and how often was this a full-time professional orchestra playing every week?
Yes, it was. We would basically, the schedule would be starting on Sunday, which wasn't a holiday there. Sunday, we started rehearsing we had 3 concerts a week, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights. So Sunday and Monday and Tuesday morning were our rehearsals. Then Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night were our concerts. And then Friday started to be Shabbat. So things would we'd have rehearsal Friday morning. Things would slow down about 1 or 2 this time of the afternoon where we are here. And then Saturday is Shabbat. And then Sunday we'd start up again. And they had different series, as you do. Then we had a family series. We had a television series. And it was really although I played already for many years professionally, it was my first sort of committed position where I was in a leadership position there. One of my duties was to decide when the people in the orchestra would go back for reserve duty in the Army, for example. It was called Milouim. I think now, what did I learn about leadership from those kinds of opportunities, and there were some decisions that one had to make. And of course, one of the major issues in leadership is about people and about how to build trust and build really solid, good relationships with colleagues. Lifelong quest for all of us, I think. And so, it was really a thrill. We went on a major European tour during my time there as well, and played in Berlin and Paris, and many in Switzerland, a number of countries. But I loved, and we did a move around Israel as well. We had 2 series on 2 different kibbutzim. One was called Ein HaShofet. I remember doing the Schumann piano concerto there with a local artist, and which has also been a favorite of mine over the years. Anyway, it was a great opportunity, and. I think the next clip we're going to play shows some of the very unusual things that we did. I also had a chance to work with Leonard Bernstein while I was there, and we did some workshop projects at the Jerusalem Music Center. Had a chance to really sit with him and have conversations, something that would have been very hard in this country, to do. So I value all of that.
Let's play the clip because it's extraordinary. Then we'll come back to a couple of things you were just mentioning.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Aled. Wow. So, I wanted to start at that moment because the camera's so far away that you're not quite sure what's happening in the distance. And then it starts panning in, and then you realize it's an entire orchestra with chorus soloists playing Handel's Israel in Egypt. And if you can just briefly talk a little bit about this project, because first of all, it's amazing that it's on YouTube and that you found it and that it happened in the first place.
We were actually playing in what became Egypt and what had been Israel, because we were playing just at the beginning where the Sinai Desert begins. So there's a place in Israel called Eilat, and right there is the Sinai Desert. So we were literally in a place that Handel was talking about. He was talking about a different time in history, but he was really talking about what would become the border between Israel and Egypt. And it was a thrill to be there. But I must tell you and our audience that we were the equivalent of lip syncing because of the extreme heat. It was January, but the extreme heat, the extreme desert conditions, we were afraid to take our instruments out, and they didn't plan that we would. So we recorded the score in Jerusalem. We must have done a couple of performances. We may have done some work in a studio too. I can't quite recall. But then we got on the bus with fake instruments. And so we left all of our instruments back in Jerusalem. We took a ride to Eilat, and we staged this performance. And the singers may have been singing along with the tape, but basically what we're hearing here is the performance that we did in Jerusalem. And there was some kind of an audience on the beach, and there were people who were kind of startled. They were there on holiday, and here we were in long black and tuxedos. It reminded me of some kind of a movie set, but it was real. And it was a great experience. John Curry was the conductor. I'm so far in the clip, I'm obscure, but I'm kind of right in front of him. Later on, I saw a brief, flurry of a little sign of myself there. This is from 1982, and I only found out that it was on YouTube because one of the singers who I got really I had a nice colleagueship with, named Graham Taylor, who came from Glasgow, Scotland. I saw him in Scotland several years ago, and he said, I hadn't seen him for years. He said, "Nancy, did you know that our performance of Israel and Egypt, when we went to the Sinai, do you know that it's on YouTube?" And I said, "No." And so he wrote down the reference. So that's how I happened to find out. But Donato, you found out something that you just shared with me about this clip, about where it is.
Well, now I have to, let's see. It lives on the most hilarious named YouTube channel. It is on the USSR KGB channel, which it's really, really hilarious. So, okay, I wanted to. You've told me this story once before, and I just love for you to share your interaction with Leonard Bernstein while you were with Jerusalem.
Well, I remember it again, and and getting to share it with you and our audience, it just warms my heart. It was also in 1982. It was May 20th. I remember the day in 1982, where that morning he had created a master class for young conductors, and asked a small orchestra to come and play for the young conductors. And it was actually the Israel Sinfonietta. So it was an orchestra from another desert, from Beersheba, the Negev desert. But Mendy Rodin, who was the conductor, sometimes conducted our orchestra, and I was, one of the principal violists. He said, "Nancy, will you come along and play with us for Mr. Bernstein?" I said, "Oh, it would be my great pleasure." So we went to the Jerusalem Music Center, and it was a lovely chamber orchestra. And there were about maybe 5 or 7 young conductors. But honestly, Mr. Bernstein wanted to conduct us himself. So sometimes he would push the conductors aside, but let me conduct. So, and there were 2 things that stood out to me about that. It was maybe a 5-hour session. It was quite long and just memorable. He talked about Haydn as being incredibly dramatic and resilient. And so one of the pieces was one of the Haydn symphonies that we were playing, and he was trying to show the young conductors, Haydn is so amazing. You can do it's great music, so you can do anything with it. Don't be shy with it. Be gutsy, and really try things out and take risks. And he played it like Brahms, honestly, and it really worked. It was beautiful. But then he said, I really like this orchestra. I want to do something a little different. He said, let's do an improvisation. And to this day, I've always thought I would go back there and ask him. I'm sure someone has this tape. He said, I'm just going to create something right now. So he created this piece with all of us. He would just point to the horns or point to the trumpets or point to the violins. And it was an amazing experience. It was maybe a 5-minute piece. It wasn't 1 minute. It wasn't 10 minutes. It was maybe 5 minutes. But he made a shape of this piece that was extraordinary, and you felt that somehow you'd been blessed by being in an orchestra that he was using us as his improvisational tool. And then that night, it must have been the middle of some kind of a festival, and there was a beautiful Turkish theater called the Khan Theater, and I remember Pat Carroll was there, the actor, who was doing a one-woman show on Gertrude Stein. Somehow a lot of things, and the orchestra was involved. There were just a lot of things going on. And we experienced that in Las Vegas too. And I was invited to a dinner because I knew some people who were in the theater company that were working with Pat. And I guess there were a couple of people from the orchestra. So it was such a beautiful, beautiful spring evening in Jerusalem. I wandered in a little bit early. I drove over and I just walking around, and I saw where they had kind of a reserved table. It was outside in a kind of beautiful, beautiful courtyard. So I just went over to the table. It was seated for about 10. And Leonard Bernstein came over, and he just came over because he was going to be at the dinner too. And I thought, when in my life would I ever have imagined that I would just be sitting with Leonard Bernstein for, 40 minutes talking. So we talked about music. He was very kind. He said he had just gone to a party. I hadn't gone. It was, probably for the people who'd been the soloists and conductors and so forth. And he said, your orchestra this morning, he remembered that I'd been in that orchestra. We kind of got reacquainted, and he said, that was a wonderful orchestra. He said, who prepared that orchestra? And I said, there's this wonderful conductor in Israel named Mendy Rodan, who's, by the way, also deceased now, but, was very, 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 very respected among the Israeli musicians. And so he said, I want to know why Mendy Rodan was not invited to the party that I just went to. He should have been there too. This guy was social justice all the way. I said, Mr. Bernstein, that is so kind. That is really kind. I said, I have absolutely no idea. I knew nothing about the party. He said, well, he did all the work and he should have been there. And when we proceeded to talk for a little more than half an hour, a lot of those kinds of things came up where he was looking out for somebody else. I had had the chance to work with Lucas Voss quite often, both in Israel and then back in the Brooklyn Philharmonic when I came back to New York after I lived in Israel. And he had been close friends with Lucas. They'd been students together of Koussevitzky at Tanglewood, in fact, many, many years before. And he wanted to know what my experience was working with Lucas. And I said, I really loved it. And then he said, now, everyone thinks I'm so great. He didn't exactly say it like I said, but I'm not nearly as talented as Lucas. He said, no, he's the one. And he sometimes has been a little this or that, but really he's the one who people really should be paying attention to. I mean, he was saying these things to me. What can I say? He was a fairly humble guy who was, a one and only extraordinary human being. But I will say this, a real humanist.
I think that's important to remember about Leonard Bernstein was that he, especially if you start looking back to the things he wrote about, it wasn't necessarily about music. It was about opportunity. It was about opportunity and opportunity for all. You described before we began today's MusicWise about how this next recording, which is of a wonderful piece that I wish was performed more often, but I think its forces don't allow that to happen, which is Vaughan Williams' Flos Campi. This sprang out of what happened with this video taping of the Handel's Israel and Egypt. Can you tell us a little bit about this
Yes.
next recording and how it came to be?
Of course. First of all, I want to say, going back to, maybe 8 years or 7 years before I was in Israel, I was in England. And I got to know a lot more. I always knew about Ralph Vaughan Williams' music, but I got to know quite a bit more about it living in England, being a student at the Royal College of Music and studying with a violist from South Africa called Cecil Aronowitz, who played the suites with it. He was principal violist of the English Chamber Orchestra and often was the second viola to the Amadeus Quartet. They recorded quite a few, I think, viola quintets. So I know there was a recording with Cecil with the English Chamber Orchestra with Vos Campi. It has a wordless choir, a small chamber orchestra, and probably hard to program, as you say. But I happened to mention to one of Graham Taylor, who told me that our Israel and Egypt performance was on YouTube. I happened to mention that I absolutely love this piece called Vos Campi because I love oratorios, and we did many of them in Israel. Not only did we do Israel and Egypt, I just want to say we had always a week between Christmas and New Year's. We called it liturgical week, and every single night for like 7 days, we played a different oratorio. It was really exhausting and brilliant and beautiful. And so we would bring choirs from all over the world there. And so I got to know Graham, who sang in this Glasgow choir. He said, I'm an avocational musician, but I conduct an avocational choir, a really good choir, because, the singing tradition is brilliant in England. It was at the time. I'm sure it still is. And he said, we do concerts. Maybe we could program this. I said, oh, that would be, it was like a dream. I said, oh, well, I don't want to get in trouble. And no, Nancy, come on, let's do this. So he rented Glasgow Town Hall for a day. This was, I think, in around July or August of also 82. He rented Glasgow Town Hall. He hired a subset of the BBC Scottish Orchestra and trained his choir to sing in this piece. I came for 2 days. We only had a day to have rehearsal and then the concert that night. And it was like a dream. I mean, to be able to perform this piece. And I had gotten to know Ralph Vaughan Williams' widow, Ursula Vaughan Williams, who's a wonderful, very enthusiastic, kind of friendly, very warm woman I'd gotten to know over the years. And I said, Ursula, guess what? I'm going to be playing in Vos Campi in Glasgow. Would you take a train up from London? I can certainly understand if you don't want to. No, Nancy, I'm coming. So she came, and it was a very beautiful experience, and I'm really glad we're going to share it with our audience.
I am too, because it's one of my favorite pieces, and I hope that someday our wonderful principal violist, Jason Bonham, can perform it with us.
Wonderful, and I'll be there.
Let's hear Vaughan Williams' piece for viola, wordless choir, and chamber ensemble, Vos Campi. Thank you, Alan. Now we know who the violist is.
It was Cecil, my teacher. I thought that was his sound. I thought as soon as I saw the record cover that I hadn't seen before, I knew, because I have somewhere in the recesses of our house, I have that record. And I knew that as soon as I heard the sound, I knew it was Cecil. He had a very distinctive kind of wide vibrato, full of love and warmth. I was fortunate to work with him for a year. Yeah, and he loves this music, so it comes across.
You know what I love about and I haven't heard this piece in many years, but what struck me was how unique, what a great gift that Vaughan Williams had in doubling the sound of the viola with different parts of the orchestra, in creating entirely different moods, even though it's doubled in octaves, meaning it's basically the same note, but with different parts of the orchestra to create entirely unique moods and colors.
Yes, you're so right. I mean, you have such a beautiful musical mind, Donato, and I think the colors that, as you say, the colors that are created are very, very unusual and varied. And so it was so nice. Thank you so much for having that piece as part of our program.
Let's spend the time we have remaining in your time now in Las Vegas. You said you took a leap, as you've done throughout your life. It's so wonderful you've done that. It's a great lesson for all of us. And you are now the Dean of the College of Fine Arts for the University of Nevada of Las Vegas. And what does this position entail? What does it mean to you? How does it relate not only to your colleagues on campus, but to the community as a whole?
I feel that my position is about bringing joy to our faculty, to our students, and to our community. And we have a lot of challenges, especially coming up, but I always believe that with big dreams, we can find our way, but the dreams have to be big, because we have to be inspired ourselves to think about all the good that we can do, and the role that the arts has as an essential part of everyone's life. I absolutely love our colleagues. I feel so privileged to be working with our faculty, and many of them are your beautiful musicians in the orchestras and Philharmonic as well. And our students are phenomenal. Many of them are the first in their families to go to college. They're brilliant, they're interesting, they're creative, they're original. And we just had our virtual graduation. To see our students going out into the world is as wonderful as listening to the best music that was ever written. It's sometimes it's even hard to put into words. So I feel that I'm here to serve and to help people believe that great things can happen. And it's sometimes it's a struggle, and struggle is a good word. I like struggle. We need to struggle forward. We need to believe that we're here together. Let's make just fantastic things happen. Let's create, I know that you and I feel this way very deeply, create partnerships where we'll even be better together, or we'll all come together and have really, really great experiences for people, and try things out also, and take some risks, perhaps once in a while, calculated risks, but not be afraid to move forward and to proclaim that we have big dreams. I think it's extremely important.
I think one of the things that define you as one of our cultural beacons is that you ever since coming, you've encouraged partnership. You have reached out with open arms, and knowing that we, meaning the Las Vegas Philharmonic, the Nevada, all the other cultural leaders, institutions that are in Las Vegas, we have you. We know that we have you as a partner, because as you've mentioned, we really, when you dream, it's much more fun if you have a bunch of people dreaming.
So much more fun. It's the best thing life has to offer, really. It's when you feel that we can experience the arts together and enlighten and enhance everyone's lives. There's nothing better than that.
Well, Nancy, our hour flew by, as I knew it would. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your story, your loves, your YouTube clips with us. These pieces of music, right, and now more than ever need to be shared. And it's really the story of our histories that are embedded in these great pieces. So thank you, Nancy.
Donato, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for doing this beautiful project. We all appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.